All right, so we ended yesterday in the middle of BioTerrain, and we want to keep things simple again. So when I share this with patients without the final word water, when the fish is sick, change the water. And if I had 1,000 patients, 999 are going to get that right, and one's just going to sit there and say, I don't know what you're asking. But once we tell them, then they're okay with that. This makes perfect sense. It also makes perfect sense that the fish can't do anything about their own water, but that we can. And so we want to make good water choices, high water content food choices, good food choices, and we want to be able to eliminate the waste appropriately. The fish just has to rely on enough water to dilute it. Just a little bit of review. Pasteur on his deathbed, the father of the germ theory. I was wrong. The microbe is nothing. The terrain is everything. And I also showed the quote from Virchow, which I won't repeat, but basically he said, you know what? Mosquitoes look for a stagnant pond. This pond doesn't become stagnant because the mosquitoes go there. And just like germs, they're looking for dead and dying tissue because they can't live in healthy tissue. So simple's the theme. Einstein quote, make everything as simple as possible, but not any simpler. Warren Buffett, simple has always worked for me. And he would know. So I have been profoundly guilty of making things really, really, really complicated. Putting together all these flow charts, showing all these interactions. But here's what I found, and through the hard way, and through just getting glassy-eyed patients looking at me going, I have no clue what you just said. Try this as an answer one time. When someone asks you, how does it work? Try this one. It works great. And I'm going to tell you that is the vast majority of the time. And I don't mean 51%. I'm talking 80, 90% of the time. That's the answer they're looking for. How does it work? It works great. Okay, let's go to work. So I'm imagining, if you had a biomechanics expert and they wanted to explain the biomechanics of a squat, oh my gosh, think about everything that you'd have to explain. Why don't you say, here, let me show you this. Put this bar on, sit back, not down, break parallel, come back up, or even put a box down for them, touch that, come back up. Okay, you got it? Good. Let's work on that. So keep it simple. So this is a picture of the sugar refractometer. And notice I have a link to something called Pulse Instruments. Super easy to order this. All you do is just put some urine. There's a little glass strip right there, and this is the cover. It actually flips up, and you probably saw Dr. Tanay looking at that, and we tried to show what we see, but this is actually a picture of what it looks inside of that. That's also, by the way, called a Brix meter. So this would come in at, the number 5. But it's not just urinary sugars that are going to change that number. We're going to show that there's a correction factor for electrolytes. So I find it pretty fascinating that, and I had an interesting patient in this last week. She's had problems with serious addiction her entire life. Methamphetamines, cocaine, stuff like that. And we got her on a good detox, changed her liver enzymes, made some phenomenal changes for her, did a stress reset. And she said, well, doc, I really got into the sugar this week. Well, you may remember last time there was a study that showed that 94% of rats prefer processed sugar to cocaine. And she was just very matter of fact about it. Well, that's how it is for me too, is what she said. So, well, isn't that interesting? So sugar is profoundly addictive up to a certain point. When you become insulin resistant and diabetic, instead of it functioning as an antidepressant, actually working, to increase serotonin, dopamine, and beta endorphin, those things actually begin to fall off. So now they have greater problems there. So everything has a dose response to it. So Dr. Tanay, after she read the urinary sugars, which I think if we go back to that video, she read something like 3.2. The electrolytes were 36. So you go to the electrolyte table, you have it in your notes, it's easy to print out. And with an electrolytes of 36, the correction factor is 2.2. So when she subtracted 2.2 from 3.2, she got 1.0. And on our urinary sugar measurements, that actually puts the patient pretty well into insulin resistance. So ideal is between 2 and 3. Low levels of urinary sugar suggest insulin resistance. Then there's a range where you'll actually see when people are ketogenic. So hypoglycemic, 3.1 to 5.5, keto, 5.6 to 8.5. Above 8.5, that's extremely high sugar. So it's a very strange curve if you were to draw it out that way, but I've found it now using this in 25 years of clinical practice, it matches. It matches very, very well. So simple test, easy to do. Turn back the clock, it may not have even been 100 years ago. Do you know how they tested for diabetes? They taste the urine. I'd have to hire that one out. I'm going to subcontract that one out. If they had sweet urine, yeah, that's how they would do it. Go look up the history of that. So pretty fascinating there. Very simple in-office test is the zinc tally test, zinc taste test. There's a zinc sulfate solution, and there's very specific taste receptors on the tongue for zinc. So we have people just pour it in their mouth, they swish it around for 10 seconds, and there should be, if they have good zinc status, a strong aftertaste. So the directions, from the website said, hey, rate it 0 to 3. I give them a broader range, 0 to 10. 0, it tastes exactly like water. 10, it has a horrible metallic taste. How's it taste to you? You'd be surprised at how many people say, I don't taste anything. Or maybe it's got a little bit of dryness to it. Doesn't feel like water. I might give them a little low score on that, 0 to 1. But we have so many people flunking the zinc taste test. Yes?
How long do you find that it takes to bring up a person's zinc level to the optimum and then you worry about balancing it with copper?
Well, if you're going about it in a crazy way, and I'll say a crazy way is saying, well, okay, gosh, they don't taste zinc. Let's just mega dose zinc and nothing else. That's not the way I prefer to do it. I'm going to assume, and remember, assume's not a good thing, but we then are going to follow up with testing. I'm going to do a heavy metal clearance. Zinc has a super high concentration in metallothionein proteins. The modern skeleton, 500 to 1,000 times the lead of pre-industrialized humans. We pull out those metals, and the zinc status naturally comes up. So that's my strategy for that. What's causing the problem? Are they just low in zinc? Or is there something that is depleting the zinc? So if we were to look at, what's zinc good for? Well, cells that have a high turnover rate, like the gut and the immune system, are very much dependent upon zinc. Zinc is very, very important for the production of hydrochloric acid. So if you're low in that, well, now you're going to start having digestive challenges. We look at foods that are fairly high in zinc. You're probably going to find out that these are not things that people get a lot of. And zinc is very, very important for the male prostate. It's also a natural aromatase inhibitor. Zinc is important for insulin storage and release. So we can see many things across the body that are going to need zinc. There are zinc molecules, bunches of them in metallothionein proteins. So heavy metals can be a factor there. And there's your quote, which I've used often. Modern skeleton, 500 to 1,000 times the lead of pre-industrialized humans. So next, we're going to get to the gut. So, when you start looking at the world gastrointestinal market, it seems to get worse and worse and worse every year. And I always got a kick out of this, because even though these are very, very popular, The reference says a lack of effective long-term treatments and limited understanding of the cause leads to the problem. Well, wouldn't it make sense that the cause to a very high degree would be what you're eating? And if you're eating junk, you are what you eat, you ultimately become junk. So the simplified 5 questions: what foods are you putting in? Now we add a little factor to that: are you chewing? How's your digestion? Remember, digestion starts in the brain. So if you eat in a relaxed state, that's better. Then we've got the mouth. Then we've got the hydrochloric acid, the gallbladder, the pancreas, the small intestine. What type of bugs live in your gut? Dysbiosis is the rule, as a general rule. How often do you poop? And do you have a leaky gut? So when they look at dietary surveys, standard American diet, basically 51% processed. And for many people, it's a lot higher than that. So people are just loading up on junk, and they don't understand why they're inflamed, why they have insulin resistance, why they have fatigue, why they're overweight. And reality is they're addicted to these foods. I don't know if I had the video that was able to transform easily, but Kelly Brownell, Yale University, made this simple statement: food in this country is engineered to be addictive. You could certainly spend a long, long time studying the interactions of the digestive system and the wonderful positive and negative feedback associated with it, but we have a ton of people. You want that picture back again? We have a ton of people that are just profoundly low in hydrochloric acid. They have guts that just don't seem to work, and they don't understand why. But isn't it interesting that when you start looking at hypochlorhydria, the thing that I highlighted there is actually heartburn as one of the things that happens. And we'll show the references on that. But hydrochloric acid maintains the tone of the lower esophageal sphincter. But if you don't have hydrochloric acid, and a lot of people don't have enough of it, it's very, very hard to have digestive efficiency. So I shared this data last time. The pH of hydrochloric acid is 0.8. The pH of arterial blood is 7.35. That is a logarithmic scale. That means every time you go down 1 point, it's a factor of 10. So 7.35 to 6.35, a factor of 10, to 5.35, 100, 4.35, a factor of 1,000, 3.35, 10,000, 2.35, a factor of 100,000, 1.35, we're at 1 million, and then finally 0.8, 3 million times more concentrated. And so the parietal cells have tons of mitochondria, and it's estimated that it takes 600% more energy to make hydrochloric acid than anything else. So would it be reasonable that people would have hyperacidity? No, it would take a ton of effort to get there, but what happens is they have a lack of mucus protection. And so, but they can have rebound hyperacidity if they have long-term proton pump inhibitors. And that's just absolutely a huge market for these proton pump inhibitors. By the way, they were originally supposed to be used very, very short term for healing of a gastric ulcer. So Archives of Internal Medicine, they said between 53 and 69% of these proton pump inhibitor prescriptions were unnecessary. It might be more than that. And then if someone stops suddenly, they can have rebound hypersecretion. And so ultimately, we want them to wean from that. I'm a big fan of using acid neutralizers, things like baking soda, a huge glass of water, rather than acid blockers, because the body will fight back against you blocking acid. So I want you to look at the date on this PubMed. This is the journal Gut 1969. And basically, acid in the stomach causes increased tone of the lower esophageal sphincter. So the stomach can handle the acid, the lower esophageal sphincter can't. If you have acid present, this should contract so that no acid goes up into the esophagus. The journal Surgery, 1989, they actually added acid to the stomach, And then they said, wow, we actually prevent acid reflux when we give people stomach acid. So think about that. Probably the best first-line solution would be hydrochloric acid, not an acid blocker. But there are certain things that can cause reflux, and how about a mechanical trauma? How about a hiatal hernia? And so, you know, it's not challenging at all to pull down a hiatal hernia. You know, we find the sternum, we reach our fingers in, you put in some simple pressure, then you traction down. If the patient exhales, remember when they breathe in, diaphragm moves down, that's going to be pushing the stomach down. When they exhale, diaphragm moves up. I have people exhale almost like a cough, and the diaphragm moves up quick as I push down, and you'd be surprised, a fairly simple correction. I'm amazed at how many infants are being diagnosed with reflux, and they're recommending acid blockers. To me, that's just insane. So I teach mom, work very gently under there, doesn't take much pressure at all to pull down, baby's tummy. And you'll notice if baby's less colicky after eating, spitting up less, you've done a good job. And by the way, when babies do have colic and spit up, I tell mom, let's do a little experiment. I want you to eat just one food per meal. That's it, one food per meal, one type, and let's see if baby does better. So you start out with foods that are pretty safe, pretty easy. Baby eats, baby's fine. Nearly every mom, it's not every mom, but nearly every mom that's nursed a baby, they were aware of something that they would eat that would bother baby. So you have a choice. Either you want baby to be happy, which they all do, or you have that food and you deal with a crabby baby. But one of the challenges is, again, food in this country is engineered to be addictive. There's probably a ton of us that have food addictions, period, end of story. So you got to figure out a way around that. There's an amino acid product with other nutrients. I can probably name it, but it started out as named Apicurb, then Cravecurb. And then you look at the label and it says nutritional support for drug, alcohol, or carbohydrate craving. And we found people that did pretty well. Their cravings were curbed when they took that product. When they give people acid blockers, they get a lot more food allergies. So keep in mind that if you're not having hydrochloric acid, you're not breaking the peptide bonds. If you get an inflammatory process in the small intestines, you develop a leaky gut. When you get a leaky gut, your foods begin to get into your system. And then you can be very, very reactive to foods. And then there's the issue with B12 deficiency. So parietal cells also make intrinsic factor. You start suppressing the parietal cells, you don't make as much intrinsic factor. B12 deficiency, now you can have anemia issues, and long-term, there are brain issues with it. So, we're beginning to realize, and some people have used the word Pharmageddon with PHARMA, drugs used in the right amount for the right person at the right time, those are good. Overuse, not good. And as I've said probably in the intro, the US represents 4.4% of the world's population. We use over 50% of the world's prescription drugs. And by the time you throw it over the counter, it's something like 70 to 75%. So reduction of gastric acid secretion by acid suppressive agents allows pathogen colonization of the upper gastrointestinal tract. So acid is a protective mechanism. Stomach acid should kill bugs within the gut, and ultimately there can be a risk for pneumonia. And finally, when you take acid blockers, you're not going to absorb your minerals, you're not going to absorb as much calcium, and when people take acid blockers, they have a greater risk of osteopenia, osteoporosis, hip fracture. So there's the hydrochloric acid challenge. So what we do is we have people have a simple meal, and then take a hydrochloric acid tablet. And then pay attention to your gut. Now, you take it at the end of the meal. Why? Because you eat your meal, you let your stomach release its hydrochloric acid, then you put a little more on top of it. Now, if it's too much acid, if you have burning, and you don't usually have that, well, then you probably don't need hydrochloric acid. If you have a warming feeling, well, that's relatively okay. But if you don't feel anything, the next meal or next day, take 2. And you continue the tablets until you begin to feel a warm feeling in your stomach. Then you back off by 1. I have plenty of people, and they estimate that 6 hydrochloric acid tablets at this dose, 600 milligrams, should be physiologic replacement of hydrochloric acid. And they take, whatever they take, 6, and they back it off by 1. Over time, their body will tell them, okay, you no longer need 5. You get warm at 5. Now you back it down to 4, back it down to 3, back it down to 2, back it down to 1. I had a woman who said that her stomach would bloat severely on just water. And I found that beyond amazing. So let me see if I can find that video. See if this one will play. I think it will.
Okay, we're rolling in. It's August. Here. She's actually had at least 15 years of gut, and of course, what was recommended was first line therapy for the gastroenterologist, which is acid blockers. She didn't seem to think that was a good idea, so we actually gave her hydrochloric acid. And how's your body responding to that?
Well, so far, since yesterday, I'm telling Dr. Bob I think to drink 4 bottles of water. Which over the last year, I haven't had much success in drinking water at all. And I have always been thirsty and dehydrated. And yesterday, I just wanted more and more water.
And why couldn't you drink water before?
I would drink about that much water, and my stomach would swell, and I would start getting burning in my throat.
And how long has that been going on?
I remember it 25.
Yeah, so it was.
Oh, for the last year, for the water. Yes.
Oh, water, but overall, burning out the nails and things like that for 15 years. Okay. So, are you hopeful that this is going to be the right step?
I know I'm in the right place.
Do I have your permission to share this information with doctors, students, patients, everyone? Any conditions on that?
So she actually took, I don't know if I did a good job on that video, hydrochloric acid with water. And that's what it took for her stomach not to swell. I found that beyond fascinating, but, if you seek, you will find. And she said, all right, let me try this. Hydrochloric acid's helping me with other things. Maybe it'll help with this as well. Let's see if I have a video with a hiatal hernia. Maybe, maybe not. Not in a format that I can use. All right. So. Easy enough on that. Got to figure out why my computer seems to get locked into loops lately.
So you don't find that there's a negative feedback loop that's strong enough it's going to shut down the body's production of its own HCl, KDHL over time?
Well, that probably would be, if you do anything for too long or too much, your body's going to have a way of letting you know. But what we have seen is that people, they no longer need it. They'll be uncomfortable taking it. So, it seems to be self-correcting is the bottom line, but we start looking at these, acid blockers. I think the average duration of someone taking an acid blocker prescription is something like, 20 years. It's insane. And it's got to be creating a lot of problems. So that's going to wrap up the BioTerrain section. So a little expanded 5 questions. The 2 that I add to it: how often are you eating? How much are you eating? So remember, calorie restriction and intermittent fasting are absolutely proven to enhance health and longevity. There's a term called metabolic flexibility. You really should be able to go long periods of time without food. If your body's working right, your checks and balances should be in place. You ought to be able to change energy processing, things like that. But, go days without food, not without water, but without food. So our theme of hydrochloric acid, we're going to change the environment. BioTerrain is we're going to change the environment that the fish are living in, because the environment is going to trump everything else. This was the test question that I had, and I really like this. Give me a lever long enough, a prop strong enough, I can single-handedly move the earth. We have to move people from a very stuck place. And I do think the ultimate thing that moves us forward is having a really good connection with the patient. When you sit down with the patient, when you're knee to knee, heart to heart, making eye contact, making a really good, genuine connection, that's the starting point of it. And the language that I use as an engineer is a strong person needs a shorter lever. He doesn't need anywhere near the long enough lever. If you're a weak person, you need a real long lever. So, or if you've got to move something really, really big, like a patient who's really stuck and in their way, somehow you've got to get the leverage. So when we run these lab values and we tell you, I had a guy one time years ago, I think it was you that told me yesterday about a guy that was drinking 3 diet Dr. Peppers a day, or not even diet, just regular Dr. Peppers a day. I mean, that's crazy. People do this. But I had a guy come in, and it was he and his wife. They drive in from Louisiana. And, I kept telling him, your blood sugar's creeping up. Your blood sugar's creeping up. And his weight's creeping up and everything else. And then finally, one day we ran the in-office. We could do lipids, glucose, A1C. And I looked at him, and it was kind of a jerk thing to say, but I said, well, congratulations, you finally did it. He said, what'd I do? I reached out my hand, I shook his hand, I said, you did it, you're officially diabetic. And he slapped his hand, he goes, damn it, I said, you mad at me? He goes, no, I'm mad at me. I said, good, maybe that's what it takes. And then he finally, got on board. I said, look, here's your future. You don't let this go. And then I pulled out my chart with all the connections: fatty liver, inflammatory process, increased risk of cardiovascular disease, not breaking down amyloid plaque in the brain, setting yourself up for dementia, but you probably won't get it because you'll have a heart attack, you'll have a stroke. And hopefully you have that before they start cutting off limbs and you go blind and your kidneys fail. What's it going to take? He goes, okay, I got it. And so it's interesting. He's a pretty tall guy, like 6'2", and he was maybe 267 pounds. That number sticks out in my head. And I asked him, I said, what did you weigh when you got married? He says, you don't want to know. I said, well, that's why I'm asking. I want to know. He says, I weighed 140 pounds. I said, what happened? He said, my wife's a good cook. So we're going to have to redefine that, right? So a good cook makes good food taste good, not gives you things that taste good that poison your body, mind, and spirit. So whatever lever we need, we want to get that lever. BioTerrain does it, outside lab does it, kinesiology does it. There's lots of ways that we can get it, and it's going to vary based on the patient. But remember the next statement: bodies respond to frequency, duration, intensity, quality, and timing of stimuli. People want to be better yesterday. So when we put them through a mega program, they better see results in 10 days, right? So Karen, I really liked your feedback. First couple days were really, really hard, but by the 10th day, you thought it was one of the best things you ever did. And I probably do have the video, and it might be worth playing, of the woman who said, I feel awful, 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 awful. Did I play that one or no? It would be fun to find that. But, you know, this woman comes in and that was her statement to me. She says, I said, how you doing? She says, I feel awful, 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 awful. And as I was taking the notes, I think I asked her, you know, was that 4 awfuls or 5 awfuls? And, you know, that kind of broke how bad she was feeling. Remember, facts tell, stories sell.
Okay, we are rolling. It is May 13, 2013. First day we saw the spores. So what did you do? And so medically, I guess they just basically gave you anti-inflammatory drugs. Yes. So now, right here, that's like all steroids. So 0 is unchanged in your wellness, 100 is perfect. Ideal, how much better are you? Probably 80, 90. Okay. And are you taking any medications? Yeah. All right, so what do you think of the program so far? That's great. I've done the diets and I take the supplements and I feel waking up this morning, I feel really great. I feel really have a jar. I lunch with my kids. Do you remember your first week where we did the initial detox? Yes. I wrote in quotes what you said when you came in the second time. What did you say? So I felt awful, 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 awful. Yes. So we had a bunch of those that we wrote and put in quotes. And so now looking back, was it worth it? I get programmed with stairs where I am today. It's just totally different. So better, I have energy, I'm getting up in the morning, get out of bed, pray, like my kids. Really enjoy it. Do you have advice on your education? Dietary relationships, information with doctors, students, patients, everyone. Yes. Any conditions on that? If you could let's make it on you can't do that. But other than that, we're going to do this again. Excellent. Thank you so much.
So there's a reason why I shoot these videos, and it's fun to remember, but I use it to inspire patients. And while we're back on that blood sugar topic, I think I mentioned last time, when we put people on a blood sugar reset, that's usually the worst. I had a brittle diabetic, her sugars were running 700. When she dropped to 600, she had all the symptoms of hypoglycemia. When she dropped to 500, all the symptoms of hypoglycemia. 400 hypoglycemia, 300 hypoglycemia, 200 hypoglycemia, 100 hypoglycemia. And then finally she got normalized. And there we have it. You know, then she was beyond thrilled that she did it. I had another guy, this one was pretty extreme too, I could probably find it. Sugars were running over 700. It took us a year, but in a year, we got him normal, no medication. Well, our ideal, no medication, like sugar 88, A1C 5.2, no medication, but a year of hard effort. So, saliva lemon pH challenge. Acid alkaline is huge. And we talked a little bit about acid alkaline and what we do. Again, I used to measure it, you know, with a very precise instrument, can't do that anymore. But we give people, they come in the morning, this is the part they hate the least, they can't eat or drink or brush their teeth. That was a real hard thing on when we do the BioTerrain, because we'd have them spit a couple of cc's of fluid in, and then we'd run it right through the device and we could measure it. And some people were in so hydrated, it might take them dehydrated, it might take them 20, 25 minutes to generate spit. Just crazy. But they come in, They make that pH paper wet. Should be 6.5 to 6.8. How do we know that's the ideal buffer? There's a enzyme in saliva called amylase, and there's something called the pKa, the range where that works ideally, and it works very well, 6.5 to 6.8. Below that or above that, it doesn't work well at all. Then we give them a mixture of lemon and distilled water, and they swish for about 10 seconds, they swallow, they test again immediately. My pH paper only goes down to 5.5, so it'll bottom it out at 5.5. And then over the next 5 minutes, you should actually see the pH rise, already get over the top, and then still continue to rise to the end. You'll see a lot of different patterns in, nearly 20, it's definitely 25 plus years of doing this, whether I was measuring exact pH with a meter or with a saliva pH. I've yet to see perfect pH. But people that are the closest tend to be in pretty doggone good shape. Now, when I find cancer patients, they're basically flatlined acid. When I see cancer patients, they basically start out 5.5 and they stay 5.5 all the way at the bottom. And then we know we have to alkalize them really, really quick. So a few people, you give them acid and they'll just buffer up to very, very strong. They tend to have a hyperactive sympathetic nervous system, but at least they have the bicarb buffer in place. I say I'd rather have it and not need it than need it or not have it. And the stress reset does a really good job at normalizing that process. The urine dipstick, so easy to do. Asher? No, every minute for 5 minutes.
Every minute for 5 minutes.
Yep.
Testing it. If it's low, that's showing that they're going to need to alkalize. If it's high, that's showing that high sympathetic activity. So that means that we're going to need to lower their stress and get them to a parasympathetic state.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Doesn't matter whether you use fresh lemons or that lemon.
Doesn't matter. You just want the pH.
And then are you giving them the lemon at each time you
No.
test it?
Nope, that we get a baseline, we give them lemon then every minute for the next 5 minutes. And, it's easy enough to get the pH test strips. Take the whole staff and do it one time. You might be surprised at what you see. And when people are too acid, understand everything is inefficient. Everything is inefficient. So their thyroid hormone is inefficient. Their insulin is inefficient. Cortisol, we actually want that efficient when we want it. Epinephrine, norepinephrine, growth hormone, they're all inefficient. All the enzymes are inefficient. Digestion is inefficient. And this one, you don't fix this overnight, I shared the story of the Olympic athletes when when they had a problem with acid, I'd have them do 20 scoops of greens a day. Now, often they'd need to do some digestive enzymes. They're coming in, they got a big meet in 2 weeks, and there could be $1 million on the line. Okay, 20 scoops a day. Let's see where it goes. They might need digestive enzymes, but when they alkalize, it's a big difference. And remember the speed chart, first 3 seconds stored ATP, next 3 seconds creatine phosphate. After 60 meters, from 60 to 100, they're on anaerobic glycolysis. And if they don't have a good acid buffer, that lactic acid will slow them down tremendously. So, alkalize them. And I do ask the question, right? What's easier to do? Take a 1/10 of a second off of an elite 100-meter sprinter or get a very sick person out of bed? Sick person out of bed, because they basically have nowhere to go but up as a general rule. You start doing a few right things. Although they do tend to be addicted. I have really good patients. They have a family in their community, and the husband got so depressed over losing his job and other things related to the virus that he basically sat home all day, surfed the internet, watched Netflix, and ate junk. And he was literally in bed at 400 pounds, and he said, I don't want to live anymore. And they said, well, what can you do for him? I said, what's he willing to do? And the answer was not much. So we put together a really good tasting shake. You know, the guy was even having a hard time getting out of bed. And it was so good that he would actually look forward to it. All right, give him 2 or 3 of these a day. So, you know, whatever, 6 weeks later, he's down 40-something pounds and starting to feel better. So if you give them something that they'll enjoy, and even the pickiest people, then they start moving forward. Now, could we have a stronger shake that, would have done more? Sure, but we wouldn't have gotten the compliance. So we want to get the program that works for the person. So urine dipstick, these are so wonderfully cost effective. I think we buy 100 to a pack for like $80. So it's less, that might even be the price, less than a dime a test. So if they're spilling glucose in the urine, definitely a problem. By the way, the renal threshold for glucose is usually around 170. If they got bilirubin in the urine, so we talked about direct versus indirect, this test isn't going to give us that, but we're going to have either liver dysfunction or hemolysis. If they have ketones in the urine, so they're using ketones during during sleep, because we're getting this first morning urine. So by the way, there's sometimes when people, they'll become hypoglycemic during the night. That could put ketones in the urine, but I'm a pretty big fan of the ketogenic type diet. Urine-specific gravity, first morning urine, I want to get at least 15 to 30. The kidneys have to have the ability to concentrate toxins, and we want them to be able to concentrate acid. So, when I was first certified in BioTerrain, when we use an instrument, Dr. Robert Greenberg, who did a really good job bringing BioTerrain to the US, he said he always liked first morning urine 5.36 or less. That was his exact number. How he came up with that, I'm not sure, but I always used that number when I was able to use it. Now our urine dipstick, not quite that precise, but I do want the first morning urine acid. Blood in the urine should always be abnormal for a male, so you want to figure out, okay, are they having a kidney stone? Are they having a prostate challenge? Rule that out. Females, more likely to have blood in the urine. But here's a simple story. I had a woman come in, and she just wasn't feeling that great, and she was postmenopausal. So she had a little blood in the urine. And I said, any history of kidney stone? No, we didn't see anything that looked like an infection. She says, something doesn't quite feel right. So I gave her a protocol, 1 week. Okay, if there's probability of kidney stone, we'll dissolve it. Gravel root is good for that. If there's an infection, we'll give you maybe D-mannose, which prevents adherence and stuff like that. But let's see what happens in a week. So she came back a week later, there's still blood in the urine. I said, well, when was your last female exam? She says, it's been a while. I said, well, go to your OB-GYN. Let's figure out what's going on. She actually had endometrial cancer. And it was just a little bit of blood in the urine, but it was contained. And they just removed the uterus. And guess what? She's on with her life just fine. So these simple little things, you get a guy, blood in the urine. Okay, let's try to calm down the prostate. Let's run a PSA free in total. Many, many times we find out, whoops, they got prostate cancer. You catch it early, very manageable. You catch it late, pretty complicated. Protein in the urine. Way back when we were taught protein in the urine is always abnormal. They got to have a serious kidney problem. No, my athletes definitely threw that myth out. When they are training so hard and breaking down lean tissue, they will often spill protein in the urine. You start seeing that on the BIA, and ultimately, that can be a reasonable way to figure out if they're, training too hard for themselves. You can get a lot of information from a dipstick. Urobilinogen, that's gut bacterial metabolite of bilirubin. So again, liver dysfunction is a possibility there. Nitrites. There are actually nitrates in the urine. So remember that the body has 2 ways of making nitric oxide. Arginine nitric oxide synthase becomes nitric oxide, but you can have nitrate in the plant kingdom, becomes nitrite on the first reduction, becomes nitric oxide on the second. So nitrates in the urine reflect systemic nitric oxide production. And so my athletes should all be off the charts on nitrates unless they're burned out on inflammatory process. Then they'll be on the back half of the curve. So controlling inflammation, stress reset is a big part of what we're going to do on that. But nitrites, that's a sign of an infection. So use your natural anti-infectives for the urine. And then finally, white cells in the urine. It could be inflammation in the reproductive tract. It could actually be inflammation in the whole body. The urine spills what the body has in excess. And again, I've seen athletes training real hard. They spill some white cells in the urine. But lots of good data from a urine dipstick. Everything has a bell-shaped curve. They rise and then they fall. So nitrate, that would be on the urine nitrate test. 3 to 6 is considered ideal. As long as they're not doing too much exercise. You start exercising intensely, I want them at the top. When you exercise hard, you increase nitrate by about 600%. If someone's exercising hard and they have low nitrates, they're just plain burned out. Bottom line there. When we start looking at ammonia, again, 3 to 6 is ideal. People can elevate when there's a liver problem or catabolism or super high protein diet. But you know, if they're not putting ammonia in the urine and you can tell they're breaking down, then they're progressively depleted. I think I was looking for this video in a previous session that I was doing. Did I ever show you this one? This was another guy that was told he was going to have his leg cut off within a few months because his diabetes was so bad. So first day I took a picture of the pulse ox on his foot. Doesn't look like that's very clear. Oh, that's the video. Hang on, I'll show the pictures. So first day I did take the picture. Then I took the picture the second day, and on the video you can see it, and then you see the comparison. That's a huge difference. And I think that's like 6 days. So here's the video.
Is 99% now. It is it February 21st? February 22 of 2006. We're looking at Travis Correct. Okay. And we can see the plastic saturation of this toe now is 98 to 99%. And just 2 weeks ago, the oxygen saturation was 82%. 1 week ago. So Travis, you want to sit up and tell a little bit about how your leg has changed over the course of the last week?
Oh, this has been amazing. Colors changing, most usually have more blueness in it, black, smooth out, and even redness is starting to recede down.
It's absolutely beautiful. This is a classic example of how bodies respond to frequency, duration, and intensity of natural stimuli. Travis Wagner initially shares information with doctors and students and patients everywhere. Sure. What do you wish to never do that. You're in a great example. Thank you so much.
So even when you look at it there, the leg doesn't look that great until you compare the side by side. And so, you know, it's interesting. I remember that day I was pretty far behind on what I was doing with patients, and he comes in and I couldn't remember how to pronounce his name, and I thought maybe I saw him 2 weeks ago and I didn't even know what day it was, right? So, oh well, but this is too good. I got to take a film of this. And I remember, you know, day one when he came in, I looked at that leg, I go, man, that looks bad. And I said, tell you what, let's document this. So at least I had the sense to put the date. I should have had the pulse ox on the foot, but at least I wrote it there. And then you look at the follow-up, and I did take a picture of the oxygen saturation. That was like 6 days or a week, whatever, right? Not much time at all to make that difference. So we put him on an intense blood sugar protocol and a neuropathy protocol. So we did the functional medical food, we did the carnitine, we did the lipoic acid, we did resveratrol, we did Ganoderma spores. I don't even think we had activated omega-3s back then. And, you know, he was motivated. Someone tells you you're going to lose your leg in 3 months, that might get him going. So, acid buffers. I think what we'll do is we'll probably a good amount of time to take a break now. So any questions from this section? Yep.
I saw his name up on the slide, and I just wondered if your analysis work you do comes from, a lot of it comes from Jerry Reeves.
Some of it does. Yeah. Reeves was a pretty smart character. Yeah. I like to give credit where credit's due. And, you know, I always like Zig Ziglar. He said, you know what, I always give credit to the sources. 1, because they deserve it. And 2, because if they're wrong, it's them that's wrong, not me. Right? So I always thought that was kind of funny, but I've definitely found that to be accurate. Other questions?
I think he was into using the Brix meter in terms of evaluating
Reams?
food, you know, sugar content of food, like berries.
Yeah.
More nutritious if they have a higher Brix rating.
You know, it's pretty fascinating how just a little bit of ingenuity can go a long way.